Okay, Tom. I'm Lou Perro. I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, the third child of Steve Perro and Eleni Perro. My mother and father originated from Albania. My father came to America in 1920. He came at the age of 14 years old, and he joined his uncles, who were his mother's brothers, here in Worcester, and they were Nick Lasker and Mike Lasker, and the his uncles had arrived here in America in 1905, and when they arrived, they spent some time in Biddeford, Maine, and then they were in Hudson, Massachusetts. But by 1910, 1911, they moved into Worcester and welcomed the family as they kept coming from Albania. Mainly for the purpose of working here, then maybe going back. But as history has stated, that a family grew here in Worcester. My father was the son of Pericli and Celia Lasca Pero from Corcha, Albania. He was born in Corcha. And my mother was Eleni Stau, married my father, and her mother and father were Ilo and Clanthi Stau Dine. Um, I made a little mistake there. My mother was Eleni Dine. Her mother was Stau. Um, I've spent my entire life here in Worcester, and being born and raised in Worcester, our life evolved around St. Mary's Albanian Orthodox Church. Not only its church, but all the organizations of Albanian heritage our family was involved with, and we all played active roles. As children, we went to Sunday school, we sang in the choir, we joined the A&O, we became a vital part of the organization, always helping out. And then in 1970, I married Barbara Christo, the daughter of Peter and Sophie Christo here in Worcester, and we began our family life here. And then we joined the church committee, on the membership of the committee, and many, many organizations. And whatever the history of the church was in these last 70 years, we have definitely played an important role. One is because we're proud of our Albanian heritage, help to preserve it here in America, and to pass it on to our children, and today to our grandchildren. So, my own professional life, I went to Worcester Public Schools, uh, graduated from classical high in '63. Then I went on to Worcester State University, and I became an elementary school teacher, which I taught for 27 years, basically sixth grade. And for the last 10 years of my years in the Worcester Public School, I was a principal of Quincy Sigmund Elementary School, and therefore I retired. And then the last 13 years, I have been a adjunct faculty member of Quincy Community College and Worcester State University, and continuing my life's profession of being an educator. That is my professional life, but my family life and my daily life has evolved around the Albanian community, and not only here in Worcester, but throughout the United States. I've also been national president of the Albanian American National Organization from 1974 to 77. And so therefore I am not a stranger. And I've also been I've had a lot of curiosity, and I would listen to all the old timers, and they would tell me their history of how the community evolved here in Worcester. And I also played a very active role from my late teenage years to present. And the tales and the true history of our church is very much alive in my mind, and it makes me very happy that I'm sharing it at this time with the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of the establishment of St. Mary's Albanian Orthodox Church. Okay. Like I stated earlier, my family was here. Uh, the extended family was here in Worcester at the time of the beginnings of the church, and they were involved financially. They owned stores in Worcester that were open up 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, and they were constant financial contributors for whatever the church needed. Um, I know my mother's first cousin, her name was Louisa Stau. She married Vangel Soder, and Vangel Soder was the stepson of Fila Soder. And Fila Soder is actually the activist woman in our community who had arrived in Worcester at least by 1905. And she played a key role in helping to raise money and to raise the consciousness of the importance of having an Albanian church here in America. So therefore, that was Louisa's mother-in-law. And I actually remember Phyllis. She died in the 50s. And that family would constantly tell the stories, how they rallied around Fanoli. And then you got to remember that prior to 1912, there were very few real, what we call families. They were mainly men, young boys, teenage boys, boys in their 20s and some in their 30s. And at that impressionable age and believing in the cause, it was easy enough for Fanoli to rally them and to see the importance of establishing an Albanian church. And by 1912, 1012, families started arriving. And then after World War I, 1920, the families really started arriving and establishing the roots. It is hard to just mention one family because here in Worcester we were very, very fortunate that we had people that were families but with many brothers, like they were the Nanoff brothers, they were the Thamel brothers, they were the Peters brother, the Shocha brothers, Vassar and Costa Peters, and many, many, many other families that were here, and they all rallied around this cause to establish the Albanian church here in Worcester to help support Fanoli in his causes in Boston. Okay, Noli arrived here in America um, at a time where the national movement, the Albanian national movement, was happening not only here in the United States, but at least the 20, 30 years prior in Bulgaria and Egypt. And Fanoli, when he left Fayoum, Egypt, he came to Jamestown, New York, because in Jamestown there was a large Albanian community that was very nationalistic and moving towards the Albanian movement that there would be an Albanian country. And so he was the man that was ripe for the times. And when he stayed in the Jamestown area about a year, then he came to Boston and he met up with Faye Konitzer and they started the Vatra organization. However, both Faye Konitzer and Nori knew that the only way the Albanian movement could really move here in the United States was by forming a church, because organizations are formed by many individuals, but the idea of having a church in America give it a more prominence, gives it a voice, an Albanian voice here in the United States. And Faye Konitzer and many other non-Orthodox Albanians encouraged Noli that the church has to be established. And then in 1907, when the tragic death of Kristachef Dimjanic at the age of 26 in Hudson, Mass., where he was refused an Orthodox burial, that was the catalyst. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, that stated that we needed to have an Albanian church. And Noli had some background in liturgical history, and therefore was the man who rose for the occasion. And then the history of Noli is a whole other chapter. And so this was not nice. There were small little Albanian colonies throughout the United States, in Hudson, Mass., Worcester, Natick, Boston, like I said, Jamestown, New York, at this period of time, and they all rallied around Noli, and they started forming the churches. And if you listen to the history, these churches were formed actually before the independence of Albania of November 28, 1912. Jamestown, New York was formed in, just give me a second here, I think it is 1911. No, excuse me, it is 1911 of July. It could be 12, but it's July. No, it is 1911. The following month in August, we formalized in Worcester the foundation of the today's St. Mary's, and that was called the chapter of St. George's. And Southbridge, Mass. Built the church in 1912, and this was all happening before there was an independence in Albania. So therefore, this gave us a greater voice to help in the establishment of the Albanian movement here in America to get an independent Albanian country. Because now we had a church of our own. We were equal of others. The Orthodox Christians were going to the closest church at that time, whether it be a Greek church or a Syrian church, but yet we were not equal. That wasn't, we could pray there and all, but we did not have our own identity. We had to assume other people's identity. So when Noli and the rest came to establish this was a rallying cry that why not? We build our own home, and we will be the masters of our home. And as we well know, it has been very, very successful, because there was at least 13, 14 churches established here in the United States under the leadership of the late Fanes Noli. Yes, I personally did know Fanoli. I was 20 years old when Noli died. I was a sophomore in college. Like I said, my entire life from a young age evolved around the church, and the Bishop Noli would make at least a minimum 2, if not 4 visits a year to Worcester to give a church service. And the Sunday that Fanoli gave a church service, it was an Easter. It was like Pascha. The church was always filled to capacity to listen to what Noli had to tell us. He was our spiritual leader, but he was our father. He was the man that we all respected and loved, because whatever he guided us, whatever he said, it was not for his personal gains. Because if he was looking for his personal gains, he would have been bought and sold in the late teens. But history proved that he was out to preserve the Albanian identity here in America and under the Orthodox umbrella. And so therefore, I had seen him many times. And also, whenever there was a national banquet or a great historical day to celebrate, whether it was Flag Day or whatever, or whether it was the A&O convention in Boston or Worcester, Fanoli was the guest speaker. There was never an Albanian national event where Noli was not at the head table. And when Noli spoke, he was an orator. He was a poet. He could speak, and he spoke not for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. He spoke 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. And his message was very deep, very thoughtful, and gave us a lot of vision. And he helped to pass the vision to future generations to continue his work for the church, in which we have done so greatly here in Worcester. The Worcester community was a 100% follower of the late Bishop Norley, and we can attest to that because we only have one church. And with the numbers being large, and with one church, we were able to move mountains here through the church. And of course, we were lucky, we were blessed, and God gave us strength that we were doing the right thing because there was no personal gain.
Could you describe something particular about Noli?
Yes. To me, he always seemed so tall, so big. Of course, when he was in church, he had his hat on at the bishop's throne, and he was tall. And when he spoke at a head table, and just his appearance and his voice and the aura about him gave an appearance of how tall and great he was. But I remember when he died, and we went to the cathedral and saw him in the casket. And of course, he was all dressed in the bishop's robes and all. And he was such a small little man. And I said to myself, how could a small little man like this have such influence upon thousands of people? Not only here in Boston, but the U.S. and the whole country of Albania. And wherever he walked, he always left a big impression. So that always stuck into my mind, how small he was in stature. Yes, all the liturgical books, Norley had translated them. He translated them from Greek into Albanian. People or Albanian organizations at the time, whatever they were, they would give him monetary money to have these printed. And therefore, as each church needed the books, we would buy them from the archdiocese. So I can remember when I was in choir, when I was, 12, 13, 14 years old, we needed more choir books. We'd call the cathedral office and tell them we need 20 more books. And maybe at the time they were $5 books, so we'd send a $100 check. So donations of the people and the organizations to publish them, and then they were self-supporting because the people would purchase these books. And for here in Worcester, the iconography of the original church, the one that opened up in 1918 on Wellington Street, the iconography was, I just lost, Tsare, At Naum Tsare. No, excuse me. Tsare, yes, it was Tsare, excuse me. At Naum Tsare. And At Naum Tsare had spent a great deal of his youth in Odessa, Russia. And when he was there, he had also learned about iconography. And he did paint the iconostas of our old church. And when we sold our old church in 1982 and opened up the brand new church here on Salisbury Street, we took all the iconostas and under the directions of George Vesho, we fit them into the new iconostas that we built on Salisbury Street. And they were there until about the year 2001-2, when Dimitri Chika, the present iconographer, painted the new icons. So even from the old church, there was Albanian hands that painted the icons that we had in our church. Yes, I would say off the top of my head, people who came to America and called themselves Albanian, 90% of them supported Fanes Noli. There was a 10% that would call themselves Albanian, but deep in their heart, they were what we would say pro-Greek people, people who had a feeling towards possibly a Greek identity, even though they couldn't speak Greek or only the Greek that they might have known in school. So therefore, some of them reluctantly did not join at the very beginning of the churches, and they kind of stayed with the church because they felt that the Greek church was from the Church of the Patriarch of Constantinople. But that was a very small percentage. And I'm talking mainly the Greeks from the Korça area and some from the Permet area. The Albanians from those areas that were pro-Greek. So we did lose some families, and some of them later on did join us, and some would join us socially, but religiously they would go there, and it was a very minute numbers, really. The Albanian population from the Gino-Costid area is a different story because that geography is a little bit more mixed. And when they did arrive here in America, they took on a Greek identity. So that is a moot question, really. But I would say at least 90% of the Albanian Orthodox joined Fanoli. And we had 100% of the Albanian Muslims who supported Noli, because even to this day, they do contribute to the Albanian Orthodox Church here in America. Okay, as I stated in the earlier question, the liturgical liturgy and the books are all by Fanoli. They were translated into Albanian. And later on, Fanoli in the late 40s, in the 50s, translated them, 50s mainly, translated them into English. But he did translate them into Albanian, and that's what we used. However, the church also played a role in keeping the Albanian language alive, is that they sponsored the Albanian school, and it was held at the church. I believe it was 2 or 3 afternoons a week. And it started in the 1920s, and it went all the way to about 1950 or maybe 51. And this was something that just didn't open and close, but was continuous. And to the point when Zog's sisters arrived in Worcester, they were shocked and awed that how the Albanian language was being used. And here they were 15, 20-year-old children who had been born in Worcester and that were fluent in Albanian. But not only could they just speak Albanian, but they were odd that they could read it and they could also write it. And it was all because of the school. And so therefore, when they returned back to Albania, they encouraged their brother, King Zog, to send a school teacher to take charge of this school here in Worcester. And he did. He sent a single girl. Her name was Zonyusha Afroviti Habapi. And she stayed in Worcester for about 6, 7 years. We used to call it Zonyusha. Even to this day, if you ask anybody, do you remember Zonyusha? That's who we're talking about. And she promoted the language for another 6, 7 years here. And she met somebody in Bridgeport and moved to Bridgeport. And we continued. And who were these people? These were mainly the women who were in the 40s beginning to establish women's organizations. The Gruash Diptar in 46, Daughters of St. Mary's, or Beata Marisa. Those women, Olga Gajali, Louisa Louisa Sotil, Mary Thamel. And then also, as the children got older and they knew how to speak and read and write Albanian, they would teach the younger children. So many people played a role in keeping the language alive. We also had drama groups. It was called Dora Distra, and we do have the old pictures. And you can see many, many people are in the cast, and they represent many families. And once again, it was basically Louisa Soder and her husband Vangel who conducted these and promoted them, and they would do Shakespearean plays in costume, and that all encouraged and promoted the language. Uh, when we built the new church in the 80s, we needed a revenue stream of money. So, under the leadership of Mariola Spiro, she started then once again promoting Albanian plays. And again, there was about a dozen of us, including myself, that would have play these parts, in the plays were all in Albanian. They were written by Albanian poets and dramas. I think one was written in the 1880s or 1890s in Bulgaria, and some were from Albania itself. And we would play the dramas. After church, we'd have a dinner, and that would be the entertainment. So we would raise money for the church. So throughout the history of the church, we were encouraged to use the language, and of course, the choir uses the language in the liturgical mass. Uh, as far as printing of newspapers and all, those were the organizations, the Vatra organization and Lydia organization. Lydia was established around 1943 to about 1991. They had a weekly newspaper that came out in Albanian that's spread the news, and all these newspapers were supported by the parishioners. They would be members, they would be contributors. I know here in Worcester, over 170 families were members of the Albanian organization Lydia, which printed the newspaper in the Albanian language. So it was a form of an Albanian document arriving in your home. And I remember being a child looking at these pictures and trying to read the Albanian. And that's how we self-taught ourselves also. That keeps the language alive. Okay, our very first festival was held in June of 1983. We had opened up our brand new church on October 3rd, 1982. So we had been in the church about 7, 8 months. And believe me, the money was very dear. It cost us at that time, the dollars of the 1980s, about $400,000. We were in debt. The bank interest rates were 20%. And many Albanian families, unknown to many people, would lend the church $50,000, $100,000 so they wouldn't pay the interest. And they said, pay me back whenever you could. So we had to pay these. So we came up with the idea of the Albanian Festival. And the Albanian Festival of the 80s and the early 90s are not the Albanian festivals of today. The same concept, 3 days and all, but we had to prepare mainly for a non-Albanian audience. Because we were about 200-300 families at that time, and we could not put this extravaganza just for ourselves. We were putting them to invite the Worcester community. It was a Worcester event where the Armenian people, the Greek people, the Irish people, all ethnic groups would come to our festival, first to enjoy our food. We showed them our food, our desserts, our music. We would have dance group, which we still have today, but we would also display our handwork. And in the 80s, the original ladies were still living here. They were getting into their 70s and 90s, but being from Albania, they were strong women, and they would do all the needlework, embroidery, crocheting, and make articles, and we would sell them, and the people would buy it because it was very unique handwork that they were doing. And also, by the 80s, the original children that were born and had been married at this point, maybe going 30, 40 years, every girl in Worcester got married. She had a hope chest. She had a paya. And those pies were filled with handwork. And many of them brought their hope chests to the church because they would never really use them. And they sold them so the church would make 100% of the profit. And so the festival was a great way of us making large sums of money. And the first few festivals, practically everything was donated. Donated the butter, the flour, the labor, the Memorial Day, the week before the festival, there would be 100 people, and I really mean 100 people, working in the church hall, making the shish kebab, getting it ready. It was an entire community, and it was a multi-generational. I, at that time, was married with little children. My children were there working. My mother and father were there working, and their friends were working. And it was a wonderful evening. It was like a family reunion, getting together to display our culture and to raise money to pay for the church. And the Albanian Festival has truly been a great money maker. Today, the festival, we make more money, and we have more people coming because 90% of the crowd now is Albanians from Albania, in which we're very fortunate. So we do have an income stream. There were other activities that were also made money. The Albanian Flag Day was always a big event. Different organizations would sponsor them, but the monies went to the church. Um, Here in Worcester, we played a large role in helping in the establishment of helping people to establish their lives here in America. Here in Worcester, we founded the organization NERO, New England Albanian Relief Organization, under the direction of Leo Lonstein and his wife Mary Sahagan, and also the late James Athanas, and his wife Helen, and of course others joined them. And it was a relief organization that was sending aid to Albania from around 1990 to 1993, and then after. But there was a time when Albania still had not opened up completely, and it became an organization where Albania was going into dire needs for food, for clothing, and so this organization came to the bat, and it served two avenues. One, it served the general population of Albania, and it also served as an avenue for people here in America who had families in Albania to be able to send a large amount of food and clothing at a reasonable cost. Because in the 80s and in the 70s, when families would send packages to Albania, it would cost almost $50 at the U.S. Post Office to ship a package to Albania. And you just didn't ship one because after 50, 40, 50 years, the families have grown. So it was an economic relief because Nero, at first, you could send the packages for $15, $20, and you sent a 40-pound package. 40-pound package, you could put a 5-pound flour, 5-pound sugar, coffee, nuts, fasole, whatever. And it went to Albania at a time of a great need for the thing. And believe me, Nero was formed, but Nero was using the church hall as the position to gather these things. And we would have trailers filled. I mean, talking about 40, 50, 60 feet trailers filled with these packages, and they would divide them in the church hall, the Korce area, Gino Costa area, Tirana area, Shkodër area. They were already things, and they would ship them to the containers. Not only do they send for their own families, but then they also would make packages to give to anybody through the Red Cross to be given to help Albania. Then Nero, as the people started arriving in 92, people who had U.S. citizens papers, either their parents who had been here. In 92, the first Albanians started arriving. Late 91, 92, they were arriving here in Worcester. And then by 93, 94, they were coming through lottery. And Nero was also the one that took the head. And with the help of the people who worked at Nero, they would help them with furniture, or if there wasn't any refrigerators around, they put on the Albanian hour. Refrigerator needed, and all of a sudden we just call, and they'd come to your house, pick these up, and they would give it to these families that were arriving. The church also took the leadership role. We started working with the Friendly House, and we had an advocate that would work for them, but they would work at the church. The office was at the church. When people came from Albania, they came to the church. And we had the workers there. We had translated books, a list of agencies where the people could go to get food stamps, could get help, could get apartments. Any legal documents was all written in Albanian English. And the church would also give, I believe at that time, it was a cost of $15,000 a year. The church was giving $5,000 to $10,000 every year for this position. But later on, the position was sent straight to the Friendly House, which in one way was good, but one way it wasn't good, because when anybody is in need and when their life becomes successful 20, 30, 40 years, they remember where the first help came from. And they would have remembered that it really started with the church being the catalyst that today is in the Friendly House. And we were also able to get grant funds through the city of Worcester because the people within the church. Okay. We had been at the first location, that's 63 Wellington Street, from 1918 till the new church opened 1982. And in 1918, that was the center of the city of Worcester. It was a very wonderful neighborhood, a very stable neighborhood. But as time was going, as most major cities in America, the inner city begins to crumble. And we knew that if we were to survive as a church and for our children and grandchildren to attend, we had to get to a better surrounding. Like most of us have moved from the inner city and bought homes in the western suburbs or in the towns. And so therefore, that's one of the reasons why we purchased the church. And in 1979, we purchased 10.5 acres from the Parson family. And that was the for $95,000. And we had a land and building committee. They've been looking for land for a long time. The building fund was actually established in 1955. When we sold the monastery, we had $30,000 originally there from the monastery money, which was in Oxford, Mass. And people would contribute to the building fund. And with the monies that we had collected at that point, we were able to purchase the piece of land, and we started the building of the new church. Who are the people? Well, you always have to have a leader. Without any organization, without any movement, you need a leader. And the number one leader, without any doubt, is Bill Johns. And Bill Johns' right hand, or they were both equal to each other, was Peter Cassiry. Bill Johns and Peter Cassiry were the catalyst in this movement to build the church. And there was a committee of us. I was on the original land and building committee and the building of the church. And when the vote was taken at the old church that we were to purchase this land and eventually build a new church, I believe it was 119 families said yes, and about 30 families said no. They wanted to remain. But with the positive, overwhelming majority said move forward, we did. The other 19 families, or 30 families did join with us, and they helped. And who were the contributors? Well, there was a committee of basically about 14 men. And we would meet every single week for 3 years. And it was usually a Monday night, all year long, with the architect. We were able to get an Albanian architect, the Isaac brothers from Manchester, New Hampshire, who were of Albanian descent. Their father and mother were from Dartmouth. They helped us in the construction of designing the church. We told them we wanted a church to reflect our Albanian people, our culture, our heritage. And so they designed the church to be almost a replica of St. George's of Corca, Albania. And so it was a labor of love also for them, because they were at a point of their career. They were men that were in their 50s, 60s. They had made their career. They had made their money. And now was a time to build something that also reflected their heritage, which they came from a very proud family. And everybody gave. Everybody gave. We have it in the consecration book. If one gets his hand on it, look at the back pages. Some gave $50, some gave $75, some gave $1,000, some gave $2,000, some gave $5, some gave $15. But it's page after page after page. That's one thing about our church. The church has always been built by all the people. The people have always felt committed. The people felt the church was their church. It was their house. It belonged to them. Well, you can look at other churches, whether it's Orthodox or not, you can say, oh, well, this wealthy family, they gave $2 million and built the church. We don't have that. We have where everybody gave. And that is the beauty. And we built it. And we built it with much sacrifice, and we built it with love, and it brought the community together for a purpose to move on. And who are these people? More than 50% of the people were first generation born Albanian Americans. 25% were the last of the immigrants that had arrived, who now were 70 to 90 years old, who backed us. They backed us 100%. Sometimes you would say that old people would say, oh no, you don't change. No, they backed us and saw it was a movement forward of keeping us alive. Si e shikoj unë akoma kam shumë shpresë që neve do vazhdojmë dhe për 100 vjet akoma. Se, kur vjen gjdo emigrant, si hardë në stërgjyshit tanë, 10 vjet, 20 vjet të parë, lipsit e shtrosh shtëpinë tënde, familjen në Shqipëri, po pastaj ai shikon njëri rotot. Po ta shikosh ti në kishën sot, një 2016, kur vjen në meshë, më shumë se 50-60% njerëz që janë në kishë për të tjerave janë njerëz që kanë ardhur nga Shqipëria. Kur javën që shkoj, kur u ngrit në korat në kishë që kemi zakon në kohën e Turqisë, që e kemi bajtur sot në Worcester, që më ndonja 70 njerëz, që më shumë se kishim ndonja 20 vjet, edhe për ato 70 njerëz, 70% që në për Shqipëria, edhe hap në gjepën e tyre, edhe danë dhuratën e tyre, që si kemi dhënë neve dhe prindit tonë, që të përpëroje kishë. Edhe kjo na jep shumë gëzim, se e kuptojmë, kanë zënë zanatën e tyre, kanë zënë punët e tyre, I kanë rregulluar e tashi po japin dhe lekë në kishë, po bajnë anëtar të kishës. Edhe shpresa tjetër është që shumë të themi sebepet markar për ditën e flamurit ose motin e ri, po bëjnë bledhjet, po bëjnë të themi këto gostirat, edhe po I japin fejtimet për në kishë. Kjo është një gëzim shumë të madh, se ashtu është nisur kjo kishë për dollarët, për paratë, për lekët, për të tërë duart, jo vetëm për një xhep. Edhe ashtu të vazhdojmë, edhe besoj ashtu do jetë. Edhe jemi të lumtur që, si tha njëri, kanë ardhur në Amerikë, trapeza është e shtruar, tash të na vini, edhe ta gëzojmë këtë kishë që na dha Noli, që të rojmë dhe të japim neve fëmijëve, edhe jemi shumë të lumtur. Faleminderit.
Faleminderit.